Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about J.M. Barrie's play Mary Rose, which is a ghost story, which I'm normally not a huge fan of, but this one's okay. So what's kind of interesting about Mary Rose is that it picks up a lot of the themes that we see in Barrie's most famous play, Peter Pan, but approaches them in quite a different way. As a New York Times review of the 2007 revival of Mary Rose said, "The play is in many ways a more mature and mournful reworking of themes Barrie explored in the tale of the boy Peter Pan who refused to grow up. Time is seen as a quiet despoiler of happiness and innocence, and the value of another world unblemished by its passing has an irresistible seduction." Now that's an interesting take on Mary Rose, and I'm not quite sure I agree with the upbeatness of that take, because whereas in Peter Pan, Neverland is a sort of magical place of fun and adventure with only the sinister undertones hinted at. They actually get developed a lot more in the sort of epilogue, postscript, when Wendy grew up. But the idea of the detrimentalness of not experiencing the passage of time is much more sinister in Mary Rose, particularly because the perspective that we, the audience, get is not from happy children ensconced in Neverland and playing make-believe and literally murdering people like Captain Hook. The perspective we get is from the people who are left behind in the actual world where time continues passing. So the basic premise, Mary Rose opens in about 1920, which was when the play premiered, with an Australian soldier who is touring a derelict house, which he reveals to the caretaker that he actually grew up in. So this is his sort of ancestral home. He manages to sort of extort from the caretaker the admission that there is a ghost in the house. And when she leaves, when the caretaker leaves at this soldier's insistence to go get him a cup of tea, he has this sort of extended hallucination in which he sees the events of decades earlier. Particularly, he sees this family, middle-class family, called the Morlands, Mr. and Mrs. Morland, and their daughter, Mary Rose. Simon, who's a local whatchamacajigger, just kid who grew up in the neighborhood alongside Mary Rose, has proposed to her, and he's now come to get the permission of her parents, who reveal to him that there was a very strange episode in her past, because when Mary Rose was 11, they'd all gone to the Hebrides, the Scottish islands, and on an island that the locals did not go to because it is very sort of creepy and has this haunted reputation. Mary Rose would go to that island while her dad was fishing, and she would sketch and hang out and do whatever. Until one day she heard the call of the island and disappeared. They searched the island, small island, you couldn't really hide if a large group of people were searching for you. They got a bunch of locals and whatnot. She's just gone. No one knows where. 20 days go by. Her dad's just out sort of walking, not on the island, but he's walking, around. He can see the island. And he notices on the far shore of the island that Mary Rose is sitting there on her stump that she liked to sit on, sketching. And she waves to him and he waves to her. He goes and gets a boat and he rows over to her, and she's basically like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I don't know what the conversation was like because it's a little bit unclear exactly how they navigated this. But the mom and dad decided they were never going to tell Mary Rose that she had been missing for 20 days. So they just like go about their lives as though she hadn't just disappeared for 2/3 of a month, then returned and been like, "Oh, look, half an hour gone." So they tell Simon about this, and they're basically like, "Listen, man, it's a weird thing. If you want to not marry her, we totally get it." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not that worried about that." So, 4 years go by. We're into Act 2 now. Act 2. 4 years go by, and Simon and Mary Rose go back to the Hebrides, go to this island. Mary Rose, it's a sort of nostalgia tour. Simon, it's more of a fact-finding mission. And they go with a young man named Cameron, a local. He actually tells them the story of Mary Rose's disappearance on the island. Simon knows this story. He knows that this happened to her. Mary Rose still doesn't know that this happened to her. So she's thinking this was another kid, maybe like the year after she was there or something like this. Anyway, they're preparing to leave the island, and Mary Rose once again hears the call of the island and disappears. And Simon and Cameron's now like, "Nope, I'm on the boat already. I am not getting back on this island." Simon's running around crazy trying to find his wife, who literally just vanished. And we go to Act 3, which is set 25 years in the future from that moment. Mary Rose has never returned. 2.5 decades, just gone. No one knows where. And basically, like, her mom and dad and Simon have all kind of moved on with their lives. By which I mean they continue to do the same things that they were doing before. They're still sad that Mary Rose is gone, obviously, but they're just like, it's 25 years. What are you going to do? So, on this particular night, Simon is coming home from the sea. He's a sailor. He's coming home, and the family, the Morlands, have a telegram for him, which they haven't opened because they're polite like that. So he gets in. They're all like, "Hey, good to see you. You've been in the ocean. We've been here in this room." And they give him the telegram, which he opens and reads. And basically he's like, "This is some crazy shit." Because the telegram's from Cameron up in Scotland. And Cameron's like, "Hey, Mary Rose showed back up, so I'm bringing her down on the train. See ya." So, Mary Rose and Cameron arrive. Bear in mind, this is 25 years later, so Cameron is now much older, Simon is now much older, the parents are now very elderly. Mary Rose, same age she was. She thinks it was about an hour between when she disappeared. Of course, she didn't know that she disappeared, but she thought it was about an hour between that point and when now elderly Cameron finds her. Not elderly, but like middle-aged, whatever it is. So, that's pretty awkward. The other awkward thing is that before Mary Rose disappeared the second time, she had had a baby who was just a few years old. She ain't got no baby no more, because it's been 25 years, and her baby is now an adult. An adult who, when he was like 12, ran off to Australia. Aha, if you're clever, you might put the pieces together now. But that's basically like the end of this sort of narrative, is like, Mary Rose comes back, she's the same age that she was. Everybody else is older, and there's no real explanation of how anybody actually handles this. Like, the hallucination storyline kind of just stops. We do find out from the caretaker that Mary Rose did die at some point. We don't know when. But the Australian soldier, who's there looking at the house from the very beginning of the play, basically we sort of figure out that he is Mary Rose's son, who, again, ran off and went to Australia, and is now back after doing World War I. And so he's basically like, yeah, I'm just going to hang out here for a minute and just, see if I can chill with the ghost of my dead mom. And the caretaker is like, that seems perfectly legitimate to me. So the caretaker goes. Harry, which is the soldier's name, is just sort of standing there. And then the ghost of Mary Rose is there. And she's like, hey, do you know where the thing I'm looking for is? And they have a sort of extended conversation about how ghosts are looking for things and how he can maybe help her find it, but he doesn't really know what to do. And initially he's like, my name's Harry. And she's like, no, it's not. You're not allowed to be. But he is. He's Harry. And she's got to learn to deal with it, which she does by the end of the play. And then she hears the call, possibly of heaven? I don't know. It's the call of something, and she sort of once again disappears. But according to Barrie's novelistic stage directions at the end, let me give you the exact thing. The call is again heard, but there is in it now no unholy sound. It is a celestial music that is calling for Mary Rose, Mary Rose, first in whispers and soon so loudly that, for one who can hear, it is the only sound in the world. Mary Rose, Mary Rose. As it wraps her round, the weary little ghost knows that her long day is done. Her face is shining. The smallest star shoots down for her, and with her arms stretched forth to it trustingly, she walks out through the window into the Empyrean. The music pauses with her. Harry hears nothing, but he knows that somehow a prayer has been answered. So yeah, this is actually one of the things about Barrie's plays, is the stage directions give you a massive amount of stuff that you can't really put on stage. It is a novelist's approach to writing stage directions. But we get this idea that, like, she's found her long-lost child, that was the thing she's searching for, and now she can ascend to heaven, or whatever it is. So again, we have these sort of Peter Pan themes of, like, eternal childhood and innocence preserved and things like this. But it's so much more overtly sinister here. And again, part of that is because we're getting the perspectives of the people who are not being taken to wherever it is that this island is taking Mary Rose. We're getting the perspectives of the people who are like, you disappeared for 25 years and we didn't know what the hell happened to you. We get those perspectives. And so from that position, it's much more troubling. Which raises some interesting questions about Peter Pan. We get a little sense of the idea that the Darlings are very concerned about the fact that their children have gone missing, but it's not really something that Peter Pan as a play is focused on. Here the focus is on that. So that's disturbing. But the other thing that I think is cool, so Barrie likes being Scottish, I guess, and he likes making fun of Scottishness and Scottish people. He does this a lot, actually, in the play What Every Woman Knows. But we get it interestingly dealt with in Mary Rose because Cameron is the main Scottish character that we see, and he's actually really interesting because one of the things about Scotland since about the early 1700s, maybe, you had what was called the Scottish Enlightenment, which was basically a period where a bunch of just brilliant Scottish thinkers came on the scene. People like Adam Smith, David Hume, artists, writers like Robert Burns, and so on and so on. You had this lengthy period where the Scots were really, really sort of intellectual leaders in the world, some would argue. And so we have Cameron, who's a gilly. We meet him as a gilly, which is basically a sort of gamekeeper slash fishing guru, sort of general outdoors sort of assistant, tour guide person. So Mary Rose and Simon decide that if they want to say something Cameron might find offensive, they will say it in French. And so they at one point do this. And then Mary Rose says, "What is the French for an original?" And Simon says, "That stumps me." Cameron says, colloquially, coquin might be used. I don't know if that's the proper French pronunciation. Probably isn't. Though the classic writers would probably simply say un original. So Cameron knows French. Their attempt to get around saying things that he might find offensive has backfired, because he speaks the language that they assumed he didn't speak, which is probably further offensive. And then Simon basically sort of realizes that he's smarter than them. And he asks, "What was that book you were reading, Cameron, while I was fishing?" Cameron says, "It is a small Euripides I carry in the pocket, Mr. Blake." "Latin, Mary Rose," says Simon. And Cameron says, "It may be Latin, but in these parts we know no better than to call it Greek." So basically he's just sort of, he's zinging him. He's got the wit, he's got the education, and we learn that he is studying to become a minister. And interestingly enough, then we learned that Cameron's father is also at the University at Aberdeen, where Cameron is studying to become a minister. And Simon asks, "Is he going into the ministry also?" And Cameron says, "Such is not his purpose. When he has taken his degree, he will return and be a crofter again." That's basically a sort of small farmer. Simon says, "In that case, I don't see what he's getting out of it." Cameron says, "He is getting the grandest thing in the world out of it. He is getting education." And that's really interesting, because that's such a great sort of Scottish Enlightenment philosophy. And actually, I mean, J.M. Barrie is in this tradition of writers, thinkers coming out of Scotland and doing these really innovative and sort of groundbreaking things. Barrie is in this tradition, and this idea of like the Scottish love of education for itself, I think, is really, really admirable.